Hello and welcome to Let's Waffle, where we look at everything in the State League. A bit different this week, we're going to look at everything in state football as well. WA to play Queensland at Bendigo Bank Stadium on Saturday. Ross Lewis here with John Townsend. John, we say it each week, but I think it's been a big week in footy.
Probably the biggest week of the season so far, Ross, no doubt about that. A couple of massive issues brewing. East Perth had some pretty ordinary news during the week. And of course the reserves concept that was bubbling away. It was at a boil a couple of weeks ago. It's now gone to a back into the freezer just about. A little bit surprising with the commission knocking that on the head. I guess if you'd followed it pretty closely, you could see that it wasn't going to get up, but it was a bit of a surprise when the commission came out and said that's it. Game over.
Yeah, well, is it over though?
Well, game over for this year and certainly in the current format. So
they might have lost the battle, but I think the war's still to be waged.
Yeah.
Let's just touch on the winners and grinners before we jump straight into the big news of the WAFL this week. Peel surprise winners over West Perth, although not such a surprise, John, because they did it last year to the Falcons as well down at Bendigo Bank Stadium. Yeah,
well, they've been going pretty well. They've won 3 of their last 4, so I think actually that is something that we can't write anymore. That Peel winning an upset, it's not an upset anymore. They are very good on their home soil. They beat Subi away a few weeks ago, and in the month before that they were in most of their games. So they are pushing up hard. I reckon they are in the best shape on field that they have been in their existence. And I know they've finished a bit higher. They had sort of hopes of playing finals some years ago. And I think they finished 6th in about 2007 or 8, but I think they're playing their most consistent football. They're a very aggressive side. They've recruited pretty well. Imagine how they'd be going if the O'Brien brothers were still down there.
Oh, exactly. Just touching on quickly, Swans in a bit of a goal fest down at Fremantle Oval. Was that an upset too, John? 17-point win to Swans over South Fremantle.
No, look, I wouldn't say it's an upset. South Freo have been pretty banged up, and I think they've kept winning. I mean, they've just held it together with a bit of sticky tape and grit and spit, and unfortunately I think maybe that run is just starting to come to an end, and Swans have underperformed. We know that. I mean, the Premier, they've lost players, which has hurt them, but they're just starting to get their act together perhaps, and maybe we'll see them starting to push up. They're the most credentialed of all the teams outside the 4, I'm sure.
East Fremantle had a little bit of trouble early, but got over Perth by 17 points.
Yeah, going pretty well, haven't they?
2 games at Fremantle, down at Fremantle at the weekend.
Yeah, and they've won 5 of their last 6, East Freo, so they're going nicely, and that complement of AFL players certainly helps them, but they've got some pretty hard nuts around as well. Not going too badly, East Freo.
And John, we'll look at Subiaco, East Perth. Subiaco, big winners over a very, very disappointing East Perth side, but the game and the result itself isn't the big news really coming out of East Perth this week.
No, very unfortunate. Well, not unfortunate, I suppose. It's you bring your own luck, but a second player in 2 years testing positive, and the information we received and we published during the week was that a player had tested positive to an anabolic steroid and to cocaine, so he'll obviously go through the process. He's been suspended under the protocols that they operate with in the WAFL, sorry, the WAFL. I'm sure they do that in the WACA too, but hasn't happened, touch wood. Poor old East Perth are just battling at the moment. Their form on the field has been ordinary. A second player after Dean Cadwallader last year has tested positive, and if it goes through and the B sample supports it, you think he's going to get a 2-year ban. It's an indictment of the club, I guess, but equally it's an indication of a problem that's more widespread in the community. I mean, we can't shy away from that, and I'm sure that if every player in the WAFL and in the AFL was tested every week, there would be a lot more positives than we have at the moment. But
is there a bit of a problem though, John? We had 2 tests last year. 2 out of 24 tests, I understand, were positive. We've again had another positive result from a very small sample of testing, and I think there is a bit of a concern that there's a high return on the small sample in the WAFL.
Well, I mean, they made it clear they were going to target test, and that is to target clubs and players who are deemed to be at risk. Now,
we also know of other incidents involving WAFL players and drugs that haven't come about through testing.
Yeah, well, I guess all you can report on and discuss publicly is what actually is on the record, and that's what's happened. Castley reported tested positive.
One club wanted to test its senior players. We know that for a fact, that after an incident last year, one club wanted to test its senior players for drugs, independent of the testing.
no provision to do that though, Ross.
No, there isn't.
And that is an inhibition of personal rights, I think, and so I can understand why some players would be very reluctant to get involved. Some players would also be very reluctant to get involved because they wouldn't want to see the result.
No, there's plenty of blokes working on mine sites that have to submit drug tests so to go and do
Cost is
well.
the issue. I mean, as you said, 24 were done last year. I think that's doubled to 48 or 50 this year.
Well, have the WAFL made a rod for their own back by increasing this testing now? And does it? I suppose drugs are a scourge and they're a scourge in society. But is it going to bring greater emphasis on the WAFL because we're more than likely going to get more of these results, positive results?
Well, I suppose the counter view is that the more you do, the more players realise how much under scrutiny they're going to be, and that maybe it works the other way and it stops players from using drugs, or certainly using them when they're playing. I mean, at Christmas time, you're going to, as I'm sure happens in the AFL, players are celebrating Christmas and New Year's Day and going to the races and having a bit of fun out at Perth Cup Day, and I'm sure that happens a bit because they're outside the testing regime. Look, it works both ways. The more you do, the higher the chances you're going to get caught. The more you do, the more players are going to get caught if they're actually using it. The two go hand in hand. Look, I don't think you've got any choice but to test as often as possible, given that this is such a high-profile league. It's professional. There is no issue about the harm that the drugs do to the individual. So therefore, as a responsible body, the WAFL takes a stand against it, and they don't want players having an unfair advantage, which is the performance-enhancing element of the drugs, and that's what Castley was done over. Look, it's going to happen more and more, and as you said, the more you do, I suppose, the more are going to get caught, the more embarrassing it's going to be for clubs. But maybe the clubs then respond and become even more forthright, I suppose, and strict in how they manage their players. This
is going to be a very controversial question, but that's why you and I are paid the big bucks, John, is to ask these questions.
There's no money. There is no issue. There's massive money in podcasting. 2
positive tests out of the Royals in the last 12 months, and there is also now Ben Cousins going down, helping out East Perth, and Ben has had a well publicised problem with drugs. If you're a father of a young son wanting to get into the East Perth zone, would you be happy him going down?
Oh, look, yeah, that's a massive issue. I think you've got to have confidence in the club.
It's actually a question you could probably ask me, because I actually have a...
Yeah, well, I've got a daughter, and I've got the question is, does she play cricket or not? And that's as much a dilemma, I suppose. Look, Ross, what do you think? Do you want your son to play at East Perth?
I think that there's no doubt that East Perth have a very strong anti-drugs policy, and I think there's one thing about football clubs and executives, that you can set the policy, tell kids not to do it, but at the end of the day, you only need the individual to make the mistake, and it is tarnishing the club.
Remember, they're not full-time professional employees either. That's the other issue. A lot of these people are actually just teenagers or young adults who are studying, just finished school, in some cases still at school.
Oh, well, let's face it, the AFL athletes are more educated in drugs than any athlete in this country, and there's still hiccups along the way at that level too.
Young men with a lot of testosterone, a lot of money and a lot of time on their hands. What sort of recipe is that? Get them out there working and they might be better off. It's a very difficult issue. Obviously, it happens throughout society. We see it in the media every day that drugs are a story in society. Football's a microcosm of society. Obviously, the microscope is on it a bit more, and the spotlight's certainly on it a bit more. There's no answer. There's no obvious answer. All you can do is try and address it in the best way possible, and hope that your environment is such that players don't want to do it. And if they do it, that there's a strong club culture and player culture that the players themselves actually try and weed it out.
And with Ben Cousins being down there, you actually hope that he can provide the example of not what to do for some of the youngsters, and provide an example for them in that regard. I think it's a fantastic initiative for East Perth to get him down.
Yeah, he's a very positive example as much as being a negative one. The negative example is that his club was very reluctant to take action because he was a valuable player. If he'd been number 30 on the list, of course, totally different, as has happened to other players at that club and other players at other clubs. They just get moved on because they have less value. On the other hand, there's obviously a glamour attached to him, and at the time the thinking was, he's doing drugs and he's playing pretty well, therefore I can do it. I guess we've seen since then that there are downsides to it, and maybe he is a positive example in that sense. Just to clarify one thing, I think these tests took place well before Ben Cousins arrived at.
Oh no, but I'm judging. I asked my question on the basis that there's been 2 positive tests, etc. And now, if you're a father of a youngster in the East Perth zone, I mean, would you be happy for him to go down there? I don't have a problem.
Look, I'd be happy to have Tony McHale coaching my son. I don't have an issue with that. I think he's a thoroughly professional person and someone who provides a very good example and be a very good coach. So from that point of view, I think you would think. I mean, you're on a winner as far as that goes. What are the players doing? Well, they're pushing it. Well, clearly they're pushing it too far with 2 players in as 12 or 13 months actually testing positive.
John, other news out of East Perth, we'll just quickly touch on Graham Polak going down with another head injury. You and I have noticed him cop a couple of heavy head knocks during the course of this season, and really, have we seen the last of Graham Polak?
Oh, look, you would hope that where East Perth are at the moment, they're going to struggle to make the finals. There's very little value in him playing this season. I think he's played very well. I think he was quite unlucky not to be included in the state squad. One thing I've noticed about him, how quick he is. We haven't seen that in the AFL in his last few years. He's one of the quickest blokes in the WAFL, I would have thought, and certainly for a 6'4", super quick. He's been knocked out twice already. We're now 11 games into the season. He's already been knocked out twice. He was knocked out for 3 minutes on Saturday in the game against Subi, in a pretty bad way after the game. Tony McHale spoke about it and said that he hoped that his health wasn't a matter of hoping that he'd be fit to play in a week or two. It was a matter of hoping his health actually returns. I think that's a pretty clear indication that Graham Polak's had a good career. He's played over 100 AFL games and been a pretty solid performer at East Perth in his brief time there. But unfortunately, I think that's come to an end. You think of all the issues. As an opposition player, what do you do if you're playing against Graham Polak? Are you concerned about what might happen if you bump him too hard? I think there's too many issues involved in his continued involvement in the game, and it's quite unfortunate. It's obviously a decision for him and his family, but you would think that there's an escalation perhaps of issues on the health side.
I'm surprised he doesn't play with a helmet. I mean, he did wear a helmet.
Maybe they're thinking it's not going to make any difference to him. He hit the ground he hit the ground hard enough to be unconscious for 3 minutes. That's a pretty big issue.
Well, that's part 1 of Let's Waffle, our special state game edition. We'll be back after the break to talk about the big game between the Black Swans and Queensland.